Kay Crystal Griffith here, and welcome back for your daily digest of motions, wisdom, and your body. For every day of 2021, we're delving deeper into how our emotions are affecting our body, soul, and spirit. Because emotions are body wisdom. They are constantly communicating with you. The question is, are you listening? So here's your disclaimer. I'm not a doctor. I do not play one on TV. I do have my master's in adult education, as well as several inner healing trauma accreditations and certifications, a couple of the goodies here or there. But really, what we're doing here is for your edification, your education, and your encouragement, so you can learn how your body works, right? So today's word, we are delving this week into different parts of the brain. Today's is the cerebellum. This is the part of your brain that's at the back of the skull in the vertebrae, actually. It functions to coordinate and regulate all your muscular activity. And the cerebellum, which stands for little brain, is a structure of the central nervous system. It has an important role in motor control. And with cerebellar dysfunction, boy, I can talk today, often presenting with motor signs. I've literally spent all day at a hospital, and so now I can't say any of the medical terminology I need to. The cerebellum makes up about 10% of the total volume of your brain, yet it continues and it estimates 50 to 80% of your brain's neurons. So let me say that one more time, because that's super important to understand. The cerebellum makes up just 10% of your total volume of your brain, and yet it contains an estimated 50 to 80% of all your brain's neurons. This is a pretty little important function, don't you think, guys? It's also active in coordination, precision, and timing of movements, as well as in motor learning. So if you do have a kiddo who's struggling with any type of motor coordination, especially fine motor, it's probably rooted in that cerebellum. Now, in the same way that cerebellum regulates your rate, your rhythm, your force, and your accuracy of movements, it does also regulate the speed, the consistency, the capacity, and the appropriateness of our emotions, the mental and cognitive processes. Dysmetria of movement is matched in the cognitive realm by an unpredictability and an illogic to social or societal interactions. There's really an overshoot of what can happen in your motor system. It's constantly checking the parameters of things, if you would, and it wants to make sure it's equated and not mismatched. What does all that mean, really? The idea here is your cerebellum is really looking at what reality is and what it perceives reality to be. And if they don't match an overlay, then it's trying to correct that. So this is super important with people who have multiple personalities or dissociation disorder, MPD. So there's a variety of ways that you can describe that, but especially with people who live in a fantasy world versus what the reality is and how they overlay. Now, there's a whole lot more to MPD than just what I explained. That's just one small facet of it. But we also have this particular issue in a lot of people who have high anxiety. And so their brain can begin to play tricks on them to think that they have actually completed things. They would die to the death of it, and yet they haven't. So there is definitely different things going on in the brain connective wise that now we're really beginning to question. Are those rooted in the cerebellum? The cerebellum within the brain, as I said, holds 50 to 80% of the brain's neurons. So this is a particular organ in your body that we really need to pay attention to. And honestly, we haven't had a lot of huge amount of research for it. So we don't know exactly what the cerebellum is doing, but whatever it's doing a lot of it at 50 to 80% of the brain's neurons, right? So the cerebellum is really neutral as far as our emotions go. It's also the largest structure behind the hindbrain, and it can be found, again, right below that portion of the skull, below the temporal and occipital lobes. and behind the brainstem. So we've shown you a couple of pictures before of the brainstem. So if you imagine that the brainstem comes down and here's your hand, our thumb is our amygdala, our favorite little terrorist hijacker, right? And so then we have our brainstem coming down. It's actually sitting behind it right there. That little hollow place on your wrist would be probably where we're estimating the cerebellum would sit. There's two different parts to the cerebellum. Basically, it's called the cerebellar cortex, a layer containing the fold tissue containing most of the cerebellum's neurons. So that's where that 50 to 80% of your neurons are living, actually, is in the cortex. Then you have the nuclei. This is the innermost part of the cerebellum containing the nerve cells that have the communication information from the cerebellum. So you have the bigger part of the cortex that's really creating and containing all those neurons. And then within it is the nuclei, which is coordinating the communication to all of those neurons. So what are some uses and functions of the cerebellum? Well, it receives information from other regions of the brain, and the nervous system includes the brainstem, spinal cord, and cerebrum. So this incoming information is then used by the cerebellum to coordinate and control voluntary movements. So think of it in this way. If you are having tremors and or perhaps Parkinson's tremors, non-epileptic seizure tremors, or involuntary control spasms of your body, then there is just logically now, there would be then an incoming information breach to the cerebellum. Because if the cerebellum is supposed to coordinate and control voluntary movements, and you're having situations where there's spasms going on or seizures going on that are non-epileptic, mind you, that's a different type of seizure. These are non-epileptic, or Parkinson tremors where you're constantly tremoring like this, then we need to figure out, right, from a scientific perspective, how do we fix that disruption of the incoming information? Because once we fix that disruption, then the tremors would stop based on what they're telling us, right? So there's a little logic here. And that's not to say that they're not out there studying, trying to find answers to all these questions. I'm sure I'm not the first person who has asked that question, right? So the cerebellum is really also like a mini brain, which comes to movement and then plays that important role in the coordination, and not just coordination, but your posture and balance, as well as speech. So if you encounter somebody who is nonverbal, there's probably, and it would be really interesting to see their brain scans for this, a difference in their cerebellum. And, there's a number of other important mental processes that the cerebellum covers as well. The key functions, though, are balance and posture, mental functioning, we're going to come back to in just a second, movement, motor learning, and also vision. Isn't that interesting? So let's talk for a second about that mental piece, right? So for mental functions, researchers believe that the cerebellum plays a role in thinking, including processing language and mood. Enter in our emotions, as well as attention, fear response, and pleasure or reward response. So let's just break those down into things that we've talked about before. So we know that fear response, fight, flight, freeze, or faint, is tied to the amygdala. Remember, here's our picture. Our amygdala is our thumb, which is in the center of the brain, right? Down into the brainstem. Here's the cerebellum. And so if you think in terms of this, then our fear response has been activated by the amygdala. That's now hijacking your frontal cortex, which is our topic tomorrow. And then it activates that cerebellum piece because now 50 to 80% of the neurons now have to communicate out to the rest of the body, which includes your central nervous system, right? So you can begin to see all of these moving parts for your brain begin to work in conjunction with each other. Now, that pleasure rewards response, does anyone remember the D word that's attached to that one? Let's see if you remember. Dopamine, that's our reward center. So what happens then if something happens to our cerebellum? Oftentimes if there is a neck injury, it can be injured very, very easily. The concussion pieces can really cause some issues. A brain tumor, it's actually one of the leading places for a brain tumor, interestingly enough. And then you have some other things that can affect it. So damage to the cerebellum or to its connection to other parts of the central nervous system can result from trauma. If you have been hit like that on the face, your head jerks in such a way and so quickly, it can actually create trauma back here. In a car accident, I learned this in my first car accident. Yes, I've been in several. So we, the girl didn't defrost her windshield. Please, please, please. Here's my soapbox. Please, please, please defrost your windshield. Please, I beg of you, please. Because when you don't, and you can only see out of this much of your entire windshield, you cannot see who else is there. Okay, please, I beg of you, defrost your windshield. All right, anyways. So when I got hit, we often think we get hit, right? And so we go forward, right? We remember going forward with the seatbelt because we got that big seatbelt across us and it hurts, right? And then we go back and think that then we hit the back of the head. But even if you hold up your hand and you hit it, guess what? Where it goes first? It goes back to forward, back to forward. And I never realized it till my car accident. So what is hit first? But your cerebellum. In a car accident, your cerebellum is actually that ridge sitting right there that hits your headrest. Then you go forward. It's all in a split second. But that's why it's so super important. And that's where they actually saw my subdural hematoma was right at the bottom of my cerebellum in my MRIs. And then that bled out and came up to the front prefrontal cortex. And we got all kinds of fun ADHD fun with that one. So I'm just saying, think through that. If you have ever been in a car accident, your cerebellum was probably affected. Yep, I know. The things that you learn on the show every night, right? So what are some other results of trauma, health conditions, medications, or other factors that can damage your cerebellum? Because some of these are within your control. Alcohol use, within your control. And it severely damages your cerebellum, which is why many drunks, the minute one of the first effects that you begin to see with drunkenness is a loss of balance. That's why. Now you know the secret, right? Now, another one would be a brain tumor. Now we can't control this, right? We have no idea when that's coming or going. And in the name of Jesus, we command everyone to be healthy. A head injury, like my car accident, or concussions. A lot of kids play sports and they just don't know the effects of those contact sports and what they're doing to their bodies. So that could be another type of brain injury there. Huntington's disease is another one. Can't do anything about it. That's typically genetic, if I'm not mistaken. And then infections. There have been with our Rona, some long-lasting effects. And for those particular people, my heart goes out to you. Fortunately, my effects really didn't last past 12 weeks. So I was one of the fortunate ones. But there are others who are actually seeing a lot of balance issues. And I can understand why. I literally, to walk across the room, took every ounce of strength in me to make it. And you just kind of weave in and out, or you walk off into a diagonal line is what I've seen. So those infections are pretty important to make sure that you're getting proper care for. Lead or mercury poisoning. Now, mercury is a little harder to come by nowadays, but lead poisoning, not. If you live in some older buildings, older apartment homes, and all they've done is put a fresh coat of paint on there. So you definitely want to pay attention to whether or not there's lead paint still in your home. Then there's medications. And some medications actually can damage your cerebellum. It's important to get those actual inserts of our medications. Oftentimes we don't take the time, and they unfold into 12 little squares big, right? And the print is super tiny. And I think they do that on purpose so that we won't read it. The fact is, we need to read it. We need, and this is different than what they just give you, that two-sided little printout patient pamphlet piece. This is actually what comes in the medication box. And when you ask for that, they'll give it to you at the pharmacy, but you undo that and you will begin to see there are some major side effects for medications that we should be aware of. Multiple sclerosis is actually damage to the cerebellum. I actually use one of the products that I talked about, my 10 stealth tools, is phenomenal for not only multiple sclerosis, but the next one I'm going to talk about, which is Parkinson's disease. Remember, those are the tremors, that's prefrontal, as well as cerebellum. And that's different than dementia. So just to make sure. And then stroke. There are a lot of different types of ways that we have tremors, especially with non-epileptic seizures, that mimic stroke. So there's another thing on here that I would add, which is called functional neurological disorder. And I firmly believe there is a direct connection to cerebellum. Now that I'm immersed in F&D and really learning so much more about it, I would not be surprised at all if they finally got some direct correlation to your cerebellum for that one. So what are your conditions that affect your cerebellum? So when your cerebellum is damaged, the nerve cells break down and they die. That's what happens. And then when they die, it can cause several of these issues. Ataxia, which is the loss of voluntary control movement. It's cognitive impairment, which is a reduction of conscious mental activities such as thinking, learning, memory, concentration. This is not brain fog, folks. That's something completely different. Okay, so this is actual full-time impairment, especially something like a head injury would cause. Now, I do firmly believe I have been able to regenerate through neuroplasty, through working with my own brain and brain training and things like that. I was able to actually recreate some of my neuroplasty. Hallelujah. And there's some great tools and books that I can refer you to that you can do some of that work on your own as well. So another one is dystonia. That's the involuntary contraction of muscles that normally work in cooperation so that your body part is held in an unusual or often painful position as a result. So you might see somebody having their hand like this. This is pretty common, unfortunately, with people with cerebral palsy. And now I don't want to speak out of turn. I don't have a whole lot of experience in that area. But that's one thing that I have seen with the people that I know who have cerebral palsy. Their limbs tend to be in some really, it looks very uncomfortable state. And that could be attached to this dystonia that we're talking about. Then there's tremors, which are involuntary rhythmic contractions of muscles that lead to shaking movements in your hands, legs, face, head, and vocal cords, actually. So a lot of people with asthma don't know that they might not actually have asthma. They may have vocal cord dysfunction, which is a different type of way that air comes out versus in with asthma. So one goes in, one goes out, and you can have both actually. I'm one of them. It's not fun. So, if you have exercise-induced asthma, that's probably actually vocal cord dysfunction versus asthma. Isn't that interesting? I know the things that you learn. Now, vertigo is the last one. That's that dizziness sensation of spinning, swaying, tilting, even if your eyes are closed. And let me tell you, that is no fun at all. Now, most of the time, I will tell you, vertigo can probably be handled by actually a really amazing PT because they understand the crystals in your ear and how they kind of come down your station tubes and into that back part, and then how they all connect into the cerebellum. So that is really good. And they've done a little cool move with me when I just could not get rid of that vertigo at all. And that was able to help me in a relatively short amount of time get rid of it finally. But, vertigo is nothing to sneeze at. And oh my gosh, especially if it's from a spinal tap leakage. Boy, that vertigo is the worst you'll ever feel in your entire life. And that headache, I feel for you. I had that headache one time and I'm like, just don't even look at me. You're going to make me sick. And so we do not want anyone to have that issue, right? So what happens then if you get that damage? So from that, it can lead to the loss of coordination, the inability to judge distance or when to stop, the inability to perform rapid alternating movements, movement tremors, staggering or wide-based walking, tendency to fall forward, weak muscles. And I would add there's a tendency almost to fall backwards and catch yourself. Now, the problem is you don't catch yourself. You feel like you're falling backwards and you can't catch yourself. Slurred speech even. So do you see how several of these come along with alcohol? You have slurred speech, you can't walk right, you are staggering, there's movement tremors, inability to judge distance and when to stop. This is exactly what we're talking about. Why it's so important for you to understand what alcohol can do to your system and hence do to your cerebellum. So abnormal eye movements are another one, nystagmus. Boy, I had that. And let me tell you, after my head injury, that is the worst thing to make your eyes because you can see them in a mirror going like this, but you can't feel that. You can just watch it and you're like, oh my gosh, it's so freaky. So while you can't prevent many of the health conditions linked to cerebellum dysfunction, there are some steps that you can take to keep your brain healthy and injury-free. I am a firm promoter and believer in what Dr. Amen, A-M-E-N, provides in brain health. In fact, I'm working through his brain certification as we speak because I just can never have too many certifications, evidently. But he has a wealth of information on how to take care of your brain. And I would strongly, strongly encourage you to pick up any of his books. In fact, he's got a new one coming out talking about the 12 dragons of your life, which I thought was kind of cool. So the first thing that you can do is practice safety. Wear a seatbelt in the car. You've probably heard that before, but you should. It's actually what just saved Tiger Woods' life. If you guys just caught that he was in a pretty severe car accident the last couple of days, like severe car accident. And they said, had he not been wearing his seatbelt, he would no longer be with us. Seatbelts save lives, folks. And then wear a helmet while you're biking or playing contact sports. And I'm going to add soccer to that. We had the coolest soccer helmet when my kiddo just continued to get concussion after concussion for a variety of reasons. But we found it's soft-sided, but it protected her head. And I'm telling you, I swear that little helmet saved my kid like 4 concussions. It was so funny. But she's like, it's my crown because it does. It looks like a crown because it's open on the top. It's kind of fun. It can reduce also the risk of falls in your house. Secure the rugs, organize loose wires, don't leave things in the way in the middle of the night, especially because you're trying to get to one place in the middle of the night and you're not quite awake. So don't put things in the way. Eat healthy and exercise, even if it's a walk around your house, a walk around the neighborhood, a walk around the mall. Those are all things that you can do now, right? And so I just want to encourage you, even if it's call your friend up, put your mask on and go walk the mall inside if it's too cold to walk outside. But anything you can do to get movement into your body is going to be key. Cut back on the alcohol. Chronic heavy drinking can result in alcohol and can cause that disorder, cause a stroke, and both of those factors influence your cerebellum damage. And then this last one is pretty big. Stop smoking. That includes vaping. That includes e-cigarettes. They impact your brain function and it increases your risk of stroke. And now you understand why, right? So what are our wisdom verses? Here's 2 for you. 1 Corinthians 2:16. For who has known the mind of the Lord that he may instruct him, but that we have the mind of Christ. So the idea here is, what mind do we have? Do we have one inclined towards creating chaos within our body? Or do we have a mind that is set on him to say, for as long as I'm here, I want to have kingdom impact. So to do that, I got to be as healthy as I can be. Now, that doesn't mean perfect, but it does mean perhaps you should not, like someone else I know this week, buy the whole box of classic cookies from Pepperidge Farm, because you might eat those faster than you should. I don't know who that is. I'm just saying. Romans 12:2. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect in the perfect will of God. The idea here is to renew your mind. What are you renewing your mind on? Is it the latest cat video? Is it the latest binge on the Netflix? Is it what are you renewing your mind on? So it's great to go for a walk and put in your headphones and listen to some great music that lifts you up and encourages you and keeps your mind on what can renew and transform your mind, right? So that might be a podcast, that might be, music, it might be educational training. I listen to a lot of trainings on my headphones. So just all good ideas for you to try. So how are you going to use this new information about how your cerebellum works? Now, if you take out all the technical, here's the reminder. The fact is your cerebellum is basically activated after the amygdala in there. And then it activates that as it hijacks the frontal lobe. They all work together. It's like the trifecta, right? All right. So remember, wisdom is the hearing, but not just that, your understanding and application. So how has your cerebellum been functioning in your life? Has it been good? Has it been not so good? How can you work to transform your body to collaborate with your cerebellum in a more positive way so you can get as many of those 50 to 80% of your neurons functioning in the right way for your body's health? And honestly, when you are healthy, guess what else is healthy? Your emotions. That's how that usually works. Because when we're in chronic pain, what happens with our emotions? Depression, anxiety, fear. And so we want to keep your body as healthy as possible. There's a lot to be said to hearing that your body is the temple. So I want to encourage you. How can you honor your body tomorrow? Not with the peppered farm cookies. No, they're now out of my house because I saw what I was doing. And sometimes we just have to make those decisions to go, I will never do that again. So take the scripture, add your name, and personalize it. Their promise is just for you. Go live, share with us. What did you not know about your cerebellum before you heard this talk tonight? Tomorrow's word is the frontal cortex. Now, I will give you a caveat. I am planning to do my best to make that one happen tomorrow. But again, my kiddo has a little surgery in the morning. So we may or may not be in the hospital tomorrow. So I just want to give you guys a head up. I may not be live tomorrow, but I will definitely be back and you'll get that extra one from me. I promise I will make it up. Until then, I will talk to you soon. Join us again for more emotions, wisdom in your body, and register at K Crystal Griffith to receive more insights and your feelings wheel. Until then, you guys take care.